morning, or good afternoon, I should say. It's a beautiful day for a walking tour. My name is Brandon Wilson, and I'm here on behalf of the Somerville Historic Preservation Commission. We're delighted to have so many people here today, and I recognize a lot of the faces from other tours that we've done. So thank you for being here. I know a number of you have not signed up in advance, and there are a number of people that signed up that can be here, so we'll make it work. We have brochures that we're handing out, as we always do, to everybody, so hopefully you get a copy of that. And if you have any questions during the tour, by all means speak up. We'd love to hear from you. We're here today and doing a walking tour of Union Square and going over to Brick Bottom as well, which is really quite connected to Union Square. It's kind of an extension. Both areas are going through a lot of changes right now, in part because the new transit stations that have opened up in Union Square and Washington Street. So we wanted to share with people a lot of what some of those changes are, but also for people to recognize that there's some older buildings here that are really very significant to our past. And we're hoping that many of them can be preserved so that in fact people feel like change is not totally all new all around them. So a number of these properties have been surveyed. They have not been designated yet, but we hope that that will happen with the help of the City Council and the Mayor, of course, as local historic districts. So we'll also be talking a little bit about the transit stops that occurred over the years. There were a number of them in Somerville in the past. They were taken away, and we fought hard, advocated strongly, and gotten them back. So we're thrilled about that. So I have today invited to be on this walking tour, or to lead the walking tour, I should really say, is Ed Gordon, who's an architectural historian who probably knows this city better than many of the people that even grew up here. And this is because I've hired him in the past to do a lot of surveying for us, going back to over a decade now. And so he's quite familiar with a lot of the buildings, or the streets, and certainly the history of this city. So we're delighted that you're here today. We look forward to having you come along for the next couple of hours. We will be having a reception at the end at Brick Bottom, and we're thrilled that a number of local restaurants have contributed to that. We thank them for that. Vieira's and Buddy's Diner and the Himalayan Restaurant. So again, thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll get started.
Today we're going to be heading east from here to look at Union Square, which now is at a pivotal moment in its history, a watershed moment, because of the coming of not one but two Green Line extension T stations. One, the Union Square station on Prospect Street, that opened in March of this year, and then one on Washington Street nearby Joy Street that is opening sometime later on this fall. So we're walking through this area, this historic crossroads, kind of with an eye towards the architectural integrity of the historic buildings that are here, indications of a new vibrancy that's been actually growing for quite a while, with the creative commercial concerns that we'll walk by in a couple of cases. So and then we will see also major evidence of the new T accessibility, the new construction, the new development that's so dramatic at 20 to 50 Prospect Street. So we'll talk more specifically about the Union Square crossroads when we actually get there. But I want to say that this tour is bordered by silica-rich areas. We are looking into Lincoln Park at this point, but this used to be the George Wyatt brickyards that from 1850 to the 1880s was this very active place where bricks were made. They start in 1850 with 7 employees, and by 1870 they have 30, and they start with a capitalization of 2,000, and they're at 20,000 by 1870. So, the kind of the history of brick making in Somerville is bracketed by the years 1820 to about 1880. And then after 1880, the land just becomes too valuable. The value now lies in residential construction. So the brickyards go away. And then at the end of the tour at the Brick Bottom Art Association, that whole neighborhood, this was this melting pot ethnic neighborhood of immigrants that was built on this silica-rich soil, and the silica was an important component of the bricks, yes, but also of the glass making that took place on the southern side of Union Square at the Union Square Glassworks. So we're going to talk about the different innovations in transportation that trigger different types of building construction. And then I just want to point out that we're starting at the Albert Argenziano School of the 1980s that was named for Mr. Argenziano, who was a superintendent of schools in Somerville during the 1990s and early 2000s, and that Lincoln Park here existed on paper as early as 1896. But it really wasn't until 1900 that it really came together, and it replaced, what was called Wyatt Pits, this really horrible landscape of kilns and horrible-looking wooden storage facilities for bricks, and it was an industrial site. It was replaced by a beautiful park, which really has even more come into its own in recent years. At a building that was built about 1880 for the Eagle Shade Roller Company. And then a few years went by and it became the I.H. Brown Molding Company. So it was essentially a wood shop. And if you look at the old photos of the interiors in Edward Samuel's history of Somerville from the 1890s, these images if look exactly like old Schwam Mill interiors, if you want to come out to Arlington to see that. So what the Brown Company did was, among other things, it made the original display cabinets for the Agassiz Museum of Natural History at Harvard. And there's at least one room in that museum that's part of the Peabody Museum of Anthropology now that still has those cases, that it looks like a Victorian museum display area. So those were made in this building, which the far left part has Wayne Barron's antiques, rugs, collectibles. It's a real curiosity shop. I say that in a loving, good way. It's this really amazing jumble, and you should go up there and check it out. So we're going to cross. Okay, so we're pointing out the so-called hidden church. Actually, it's perfectly visible on the Somerville Ave side, but and it has not been a church since the early 1960s, but this is St. Thomas Episcopal Church, which was built in the Gothic Revival style in 1870, the same year that the Catholic St. Joseph's Church across the way was started. And it started off as a kind of a satellite of St. John the Evangelist Church on Devon Street in Charlestown. And it was built and designed by the George Treffren Contracting Company. So there wasn't an architect involved in the design per se, but a contractor who had that kind of command of that design. In the 60s and 70s, and I think later, it was a social services building, and now it's going to be having a new life as commercial concerns on the first floor and residential, right?
This was a church that nobody even knew was here before. Most people, unless you went on one of our tours once before and could see the cross, But it has now been fixed up and actually a lot of renovation done. But the interesting thing particularly now is that it's been incorporated into the new development here. And this is part of what the city, through the planning department, is trying to do, is to get developers, to actually integrate the older structures that have some architectural or historical significance incorporated within their plans, not just decide to demolish them. So one of the reasons we're doing this tour today, and any of the tours, is that so people have a better appreciation and recognition of these older properties in the city. There are a number of them, and unless you keep your eyes peeled, sometimes you don't see them. This is a prime example. But this is the goal we have right now in the city, so keep your eyes open.
Okay, so Lunch City Studio. I want you to all notice this great graphic design, great prints for sale that have to do with Somerville. Okay, we're right in the square itself. We're talking about St. Joseph's Roman Catholic Church first, which was built between 1870 and 1874. The architect was a James Murphy. Yes, the church originally had a steeple, which was taken down in 1978 because it was declared structurally unsound. But it is designed in the Gothic Revival style, and of course it's pointed arches galore and buttresses along the side walls that project out. But I just wanted to mention that this is the first Roman Catholic church in the city of Somerville. And before that, by 1870, Somerville had a population of Catholics numbering 2,000. And before 1870, Somerville Catholics had to walk to churches in Cambridge or as far away as the North End in Boston. So finally in 1870, when the tensions between Protestants and Catholics calmed down, then it was a better atmosphere in which to build a Catholic church. So the first pastor, Monsignor Christopher McGrath, would serve this church beginning in 1871 for 63 years. And so the McGrath and OBrien Highway is named for Monsignor McGrath and another priest, OBrien, who is also affiliated with this church. So that highway down there, which hews to our transportation theme, is probably the only one in the U.S. named for Catholic priests, and that's a fun factoid in my book. So, okay. So, looking into the square.
I want to mention the school back there.
Yes, and we walked by the St. Joseph's Roman Catholic Elementary School from 1890. That is a very restrained example of the Queen Anne. It is almost astylistic. It's all about the red brick and the rock-faced stone trimmings and, but okay, in the interest of time, we're going to launch into looking into the square. The white building that's angled out on the left is variously known as the Stone Building and Barristers Hall. And yes, there were a lot of law firms in there at one time and a savings bank as well. But the Stone Building part comes in because one of the Stones, a prominent family in town here that were prominent well before the Revolution, back when Somerville was still part of Charlestown, we'll get to that eventually. He was the treasurer. One of the Stones was the treasurer of that bank. And over the years, it's lost some of its embellishments and it's been painted white. And that brings up the fact that a lot of the buildings around us were more full-blown examples of Victorian commercial residential blocks. By block, that's like saying building. And like where we're standing here with this low-rise commercial, this was the old Masonic Hall that was a beautiful Gothic Revival building that is long gone. And then across the street was the Warren Hotel. That'll be relevant when we come to 215 Washington Street. And we'll talk about a man who worked there. And then diagonally across the street, that little gray Midnight convenience store building is the oldest building in the square. It's from 1845. And that is a remnant of what used to be around this square. It used to be primarily residential before the Civil War. If you look at an old photograph from the 1850s, you will see lots of Greek Revival houses all around the square. And after the Civil War, that's when you get the Victorian commercial block construction, okay? And so Union Square was variously known as Sandpit Square because of its proximity to the brick-making activities. Then it was called Liberty Pole Square because in 1853, firemen from the predecessor firehouse that was down there put up a Liberty Pole in 1853. And then the Union name comes in during the beginnings of the Civil War, it is thought, because there was a sign-up station, this historic marker here, right here, shows where young men could go and sign up, recruit for the Union Army during the Civil War. And there was an encampment of Union troops up on Prospect Hill, just as in Revolutionary War times there was Israel Putnam's encampment during the Revolutionary era. Okay, so and I have to say that this was the most unlikely, in terms of topography, place for a vibrant commercial crossroads to spring up, because it is hemmed in between Prospect Hill off in that direction and what used to be the marshland associated with the Millers River, which is a river that no longer exists. It has all been filled in.
Can you stop and go over to Emerson?
Yes.
You can come back and
Okay, I know I have a lot more to say, but we're trying to get to 3 Emerson Street. But we're going to take a shortcut, Brandon. We're going to do this.
So I'm Mike Katz, and this is my wife, Linda Gritz. We are the homeowners of 3 Emerson. We've been here for 38 years, and the area has changed a lot. We have lost, as you can see, that house on the corner, that creamish.
Well, let's say when we first moved here, all these houses you could find on an 1872 map of Somerville.
Right. Yep.
There are some great resources. Somerville Beyond the Neck is a great book.
Yep.
The Somerville Library History Room. You can find every every resident since the 1800s. We went to the Registry of Deeds and went back to find the first deeds to our house. We found our house dates back to the 1860s. These on this side of the street, they all date back to an 1859 map. So Brandon had been encouraging us for many years to try and protect the neighborhood and get designated as a local historic district. And we talked to our neighbors and worked on it, and some of them were not so excited about it, so it kind of didn't go anywhere, and we've lost 2 houses. So that's why I wanted to just catch up on some of the history. The developers, so the one on the corner was developed a few years ago into a single family turned into 2 luxury condos, and this one right here, another single family being turned into 2 luxury condos.
So yeah, we're sort of at the forefront. We were very lucky that when the people who we bought it from, who live right across the street here, put the plastic siding on in the 1970s. They didn't remove all the brackets. They just stayed below. And basically, when we bought the house 38 years ago, we said we want to get rid of that plastic. And we finally were able to afford to do it because it's not a small job.
So we did it last year.
So last year, this was...
Thanks to Cindy, our architect.
And our architect is right here, Cindy Larson. So yeah, it's I guess people, the interesting things historically about the house is that The foreman of Union Glassworks lived in this house, we think among the earliest.
Yeah.
Nathaniel Dennett.
Yep.
And
There's more information in your booklet.
Right,
Yeah.
and,
Oh, okay.
and one of his sons was a machinist for Union Glass, and the other son is described as being a paper hanger, which means wallpaper.
yeah.
So,
And we also know that Dennett went eventually to became the head of the waterworks
The
for the
superintendent
city
of waterworks.
superintendent of waterworks for the city of Somerville.
Yeah, and as you can see, there's lots of changing going on. That little brown structure you can see just poking over is the elevator leading down to the brand new Union Square station, Green Line station. And as a result, we have development. This 25-story building wasn't here 3 years ago.
Is that condos or apartments?
So in the winter, yeah.
A little bit.
Yeah.
Is that
It
going to be
does.
condos or apartments up there?
Apartments.
Apartments.
with 20% affordable, so at least there's some.
right, 400 plus units.
So
So-
some needed affordable housing.
So we got together with our neighbors, just to cut to the chase. 3 of us have definitely.
The remaining single-family houses that date back from the 1800s, this one, and ours, we've applied to go through the process to get designated as a local historic district. The brown house at the end already has been designated.
Right,
So
and that is probably the oldest house in the neighborhood straight ahead of us. That is 1856, and the deeds indicate that it was extant, by September of 1856.
Cool.
And so Samuel Tuttle was the carpenter who built that house and probably lived in it for a time before he sold it. And so I just want to say that between 1851, when the Martin Draper map of Somerville comes out, the first really good, accurate map of Somerville with houses indicated, there's nothing in this little triangular neighborhood in terms of houses. When you look at the 1858 McIntyre map, that's when you see the house dots appearing, right? And so what the delay was that the Millers River, which, as I mentioned, no longer exists, it turned into kind of a creek, and it went right through this neighborhood. It started out as looking like a pretty, decent river down by Brick Bottom in that area, but it very quickly turned into this meandering brook or creek or stream, however you want to characterize it, so that this area was filled in the mid 1850s, and then the housing could commence. Yeah.
So one of the reasons we wanted to come down here and we wanted to have them go late to their next appointment is because this is just an example of what planners do in the city of Somerville, which is we persist. So we're very happy. The 14 Everett Street at the end of the block that Ed was just talking about was actually designated as a single building local historic district back many years ago, like in 2010. And so what we like to do is have local historic districts that have more properties in them than one building. But we have actually championed that in the state of Massachusetts, having single building districts. Because when we started this whole surveying effort after the Beyond the Neck book was created and published in 1982, it was pretty clear that a number of siding salesmen were making inroads with a lot of people and getting them to side their houses because it would be maintenance free and it would save them a lot of time and money over time in painting and such. So because of that, we realized that we were going to lose a lot more properties if we didn't get them designated and therefore protected over time. So this is back in 1984. So we went forward and to the Board of Aldermen at the time and got designated over 100 properties in the city, but many of them, most of them, were single building districts because the ones next door on either side were not worthy or eligible any longer. So since then, we've been trying to remedy that and actually combine single building districts or expand them wherever possible. And so 14 Everett and hopefully what's going to happen here on Emerson is going to be an example of that, which is we started with a single building district and then we go to a 4 building district. There are some non-contributing properties in between, as we just discussed, that developers have chosen to do. But at least we will have some vestige of earlier times in Somerville, which are still very significant to the city's history. So we thank Michael and
thank
Linda
you so much.
for persisting on that.
You persisted. So I mean, that's a mansard, it's a neo-mansard house at this point. But I think what's being added to this little area is complementary to the older buildings. I think you see that down there on the left, the kind of cream-colored house. It's a pretty sympathetic addition to what's going on around it. But what you see illustrated here at 3 Emerson and down the way at 14 Everett is Somerville really, really likes the center gable approach to Italianate housing. You see that in many, many parts of the city. Okay, so I just want to revisit the idea of transportation changing the fortunes of Union Square. So going back to the 17th, 18th, and early 19th century, you have dairy and agricultural products making their way through what is now Somerville, then Charlestown. Remember that Charlestown is founded in 1629, and Somerville breaks away as an independent city in 1842. And it can make that break because by then it is strong enough to do so thanks to its transportation options, the fact that factories are beginning to grow along the lengths of the train tracks, and so it's really starting to come into its own in the 1840s. There's a financial panic in 1837, then the recovery, and then Somerville's industries start popping, basically. So you have this dairy agricultural delivery vehicles, horse-drawn vehicles, following a system of streets: Elm Street, Somerville Ave, which historically was called Charlestown Lane, and then it acquired a nickname, Milk Row. And I have heard Milk Row applied to the whole Elm Street through Somerville Ave to Washington Street, and then into what is now Sullivan Square, and eventually to Charlestown. And then a ferry was available to take the goods to Boston. And then in 1786, there was the Warren Bridge, which really changed everything, that ran along parallel to where the Charles River Dam locks are today, over, not by the Museum of Science, but by North Station. Yes. So then you have the railroad coming in, first the Boston and Lowell, which was chartered in 1833, and it is available in 1835. It's my understanding that it was primarily to transport the powers that be in Boston fast and efficient right up to Lowell, to the mills that were, developing, and, they're owning them and things like that. But it's really the Boston and Fitchburg line that comes in 1842, first as freight, then in 1845 accepting passengers. That's really a change maker, because you have the American Tube Company coming in the early 1850s that's making metal tubing for steamships and railroad trains and boilers and all kinds of things. And then you have Union Glass coming in 1854, which is thanks to Amory and Freeman Houghton, who moved their company from East Cambridge into Somerville on the south side of Union Square. And it's been said that the Union Square name is coming from the fact that Amory Houghton wanted his customers to make sure that they knew that he was on the side of the Union. Right, so then that name may have been transposed into Union Square. But then in 1860, the the Houghtons moved their company to Williamsburg, Brooklyn, which is now like the hippest neighborhood in the world. And then in after 1860, they move up to Corning, New York. So actually Union Glass is much studied because it's part of the Corning Glass story. And if you ever go up there, be sure to go to the Corning Glass Museum, which is amazing, amazing, amazing. Okay, but what's more interesting to me is what's happening after 1880 to the company that's still here. And that's with Julian de Cordova, who is into Art Nouveau glass, showy glass, you know, showpieces that would end up at the Columbian Exposition in Chicago. And so he is the guy for whom the de Cordova Museum in Lincoln is named for. Okay, and that property was put together in the late 1940s. That's my admittedly imperfect understanding of it. And they have these wonderful temporary art shows, etc. Okay, so, all right, the railroads as transformative. Then you have 1890, around 1890, the electric trolley becomes available. And so this is, you know, I think more exciting for lower level office people, clerks, and, you know, the people who run the offices. They can get to work more quickly. And then we have some examples of buildings that were built in response to this electric trolley availability, which we will see around the corner up that way with the Hannah Allen block. Okay, and then we come to the story of Somerville as an automotive pioneer. And, you know, it's not an accident that Ford Motors is set up its assembly plant in East Somerville, where Assembly Square and Assembly Row is today, more like Assembly Square in that area. And that was in 1925. But going back to the 19-teens, you start to see this burgeoning number of stores that have to do with automobiles, whether it's tires, whether it's storage, whether it's you know, repair, whatever. This is what Somerville is, you know, it's the go-to place. So diagonally across the street, there's that two-story long, low brick building next to Ricky's florist concern. And that is the oldest surviving automotive-related building in the city. It's 1914. That's 1 year before Henry Ford's Model T becomes available. So that is old by these standards.
And it's still in operation.
And it's still in operation. And then we're looking across the street at the Union Square Fire Station of 1903, 1904 by the architect Walter T. Littlefield, who, if I'm not mistaken, his claim to fame is really the main building of the Somerville Public Library System up on Prospect Hill, or rather Central Hill, which is 1914. But there has been a fire station on that site since the 1850s, since like 1856. And so, you know, it doesn't have its original kind of cupola, open belfry deal going on. But it's pretty intact, and it still, you know, serves the city for SCAT TV and other good causes, functions. Let's continue. Okay, so I've been hearing Miller's River questions, and what happens is that by the 1860s, the Miller's River is being severely polluted by the waste products of the meatpacking, animal rendering concerns that were in, you know, eastern Somerville.
Hi, I'm sorry. Hi.
Hi. So the river was it starts out as this bucolic pastoral situation where there's a Bullfinch designed country estate overlooking it further in that direction that we'll talk about. And after the Civil War, it's become so polluted that the first Massachusetts Board of Health was founded just to tackle that problem in 1869. And so the long, slow process of filling in the river completely, although it's still underground, started, and it was finished in the early 1900s. And so, Goodbye River, it used to be this great dividing line water feature that separated Cambridge from Somerville. And we don't have that anymore. But, I meant to point out that Washington Street that we've been walking along at the start of the tour was a colonial era highway, 1630s. Around 1635, Washington Street and Broadway off on the other side of Prospect Hill in East Somerville, their early highways. Broadway back then curved towards Medford, didn't go up and over Winter Hill. It does so beginning in the early 1790s when it goes all the way out to Arlington Center, Arlington then known as Menotomy. And connecting Washington Street, Somerville Ave back there, were these rangeways. There were like 11 of them from East Somerville practically to Alewife Brook that connected the east-west highways so that the farmers in the interior could bring their farm products down through these rangeways, which have since turned into just regular streets. But I mean, we're talking, Franklin Street through North Street over by Alewife Brook, and Central Street is one of those streets. There are any number of these rangeways. Let's turn our attention to the post office from 1935, which was a Works Progress Administration, WPA, Franklin D. Roosevelt administration funded federal building that was built. One of the architects was named Maurice Meade, who was kind of like the architect from Washington, who would come up here occasionally to supervise the architect that was really, I shouldn't say really, but was kind of like co-designing the building. And I think it kind of illustrates, in the mid-1920s, the Rockefellers get Colonial Williamsburg off the ground. They fund that. People's attentions are turned to these beautiful red brick, Georgian colonial buildings that they want to recreate as suburban homes and public buildings. And that's, I think, where this kind of a design is coming from. And I'm sure if many of us have used that post office. It closed in 2013. There's a beautiful mural when you walk in over on the right. There's a WPA-funded mural by Ross Moffett, who was one of the original Provincetown art colony painters. And it's a very interesting, colorful mural showing the British in their retreat back to Boston from Concord on April 19th, 1775. And they skirt around the edge of Prospect Hill. That's Prospect Hill up in the back. And it's depicting the story of a very old man who lived in the house along Washington Street here named James Hill. And he said to his sons who were standing nearby, I'm too old to run, as the soldiers came by, but I'm not too old to fight. So the redcoats shot him. There's a monument to his passing further down. And so, there was some fighting that was along this section of Washington Street on April 19th. And I just want to point out that this is not purely colonial revival. You see that entrance arch with the prominent console keystone up at the top. That's coming out of Renaissance architecture that's just kind of brought into the mix here, and then the entrance surrounds with the broken scroll pediment. I mean, literally, like not like somebody's breaking it in half, but it's sometimes called a swan's neck scroll pediment. That is very colonial revival. The coins at the corners of the central pavilion and at either end of the main facade have basis in Georgian architecture. But I think the other thing that's thrilling, well, okay, thrilling, I guess, is the ironwork that survives, the railings and the lamps that are being held up, and it's a very handsome building, I think. We're looking off in this direction at 215 Washington Street, and the owner of the house told us that the second floor and the gambrel roof attic were originally rose from the ground up, and that in 1860 the original story and attic were raised onto a new first floor, and so the original part of the building is mid-18th century, built for a family named Shedd, S-H-E-D-D, farmers. You know, here it is looking very Italianate with this extensive rear L that was added in 1860. And you can see why the Italianate is called the bracketed style, because you see brackets at the projecting bay windows on the first and second floors, and certainly at the porch, on the front porch. And then you have these segmental arched dormers, and then the shape of the attic window, which apparently had to be changed to be in sync with the Italianate that's going on below. So this was built for, and it's in your paperwork. The owner in 1860 worked for the Warren Hotel, and I've been trying to figure out, did he own the Warren Hotel in Union Square? Was he employed there as a clerk or something? But I'm blanking on Walker. George Walker was the Victorian era owner. A lot of buildings were taken down during the Depression, either taken down by a story and a roof to cut down on property taxes. The 1930s, the Depression was destructive in so many ways and destructive to buildings. And so you could call the upper floor and attic the witness house part of this story, because it witnessed in its original configuration the British marching past here during their retreat from Concord on April 19th. So that's more of a term that you hear out in the countryside in Arlington and Lexington and Concord. Oh, you know, there's a witness house that witnessed all this April 19th action. But here it is in Somerville, just served up in a very different way.
Yeah, it's also interesting to note that this house was renovated. It did not look like this 25, 30 years ago at all. It was actually a bit of an eyesore. And being right on Washington Street, which is at that time a major thoroughfare, but was mostly commercial, a lot of automotive type uses and such. So it was not what you call an upscale type of area. But the owner took it upon himself to do all of the restoration work, which was pretty amazing. And he actually is a woodworker himself, so he did some very fine carpentry work. He's actually well known for restoring staircases, wood grand staircases and such. And he still lives there now, and he was on the Preservation Commission for many years as a member and the commissioner as well. So we're very appreciative of the work that he's did, and that has inspired other work to happen in Union Square thereafter. So again, a lot of these stories are what we hope will inspire other people to look at their houses with new eyes when they go back.
We're seeing the more recent 1980s-ish police and fire offices across the way, but behind it there is more evidence of a 1927 trolley barn that is along Somerville Avenue and part of Merriam Street here. And it was a storage facility for electric trolleys. So it's the behind part from 1927 that is of transportation history interest. And then over here, you have the Hannah Allen block of 1890, which is kind of symbolic of the electric trolley, either predicted to come through or had come through, that started out with a German bakery and an Italian grocery on the first floor with apartment rentals above. And so Hannah Allen, her first husband, was high up in the administration of what was back then called the McLeans Lunatic Asylum, a term we'd never use today, but that's the way it went. And then her second husband, a man from New Hampshire, got into Somerville real estate and did quite well for himself. And that was one of the examples of his real estate development. And the building was in her name, so I'm going with the woman's name to name this building.
Thank you.
Yes. And so, when you're looking at the main facade, the projections at either end are oriel windows, O-R-I-E-L. It's a bay window if it starts from the ground, projects out, works its way up. It's an oriel if it's starting on an upper floor with, projecting out with nothing under it, making its way up to the roof line. Evidence of the changes that come with transportation innovations. I know this is less than scenic, but it's where a large group can actually gather. And I just wanted to point out that this above us is the McGrath and OBrien Highway, which is part of Route 28, which is comprised of a collection of older and newer roads that start, believe it or not, in Eastham on Cape Cod and go all the way up into New Hampshire. And so this leg of Route 28 was built in the mid-1920s, and it was this highway that said to people like A&P, we'll talk about them later on, and Ford Motors, there's going to be really great transportation for your companies that involve a lot of trucks, and you would be well to build your factory near something like McGrath and OBrien Highway. So that's a 1920s piece of this transportation story, but there's an 1890 piece directly across the street in a building that's numbered 157 Washington Street that was built between 1890 and 1895, and it's one of these commercial residential blocks. The residents were composed of Irish, Italian, Portuguese families. Further research is needed on this building, but it was built in response to the electric trolley coming through here, just like the Hannah Allen. The red brick directly across from us with the curved facade that gives it some distinction. Let's continue. We are here on Washington Street looking at two local landmarks. We have, first of all, here the Samuel Ireland House, built around 1790, as best we can tell from the deeds. And it's a simple, you could call it a late Georgian or an early federal cottage. It's right on the cusp of late Georgian into federal. The federal style in most architectural history books says it runs from around 1790 to 1830. And then before that, it's the Georgian style going back to the 1710s, Georges 1, 2, and 3. And so this Samuel Ireland, the Ireland family was a big pre- and post-Revolutionary War farming family. There's another Ireland house that is from around the same time, further down on Somerville Ave, down a little past the family market basket across the street. It's at Granite Street and Somerville Ave. That is a Federal with a hip roof, not a gable roof as we see here. So this is a remarkable survival, and looking the best that it has in, I would say, many years. It looks really good. And then over here is Buddy's Truck Stop Diner that started out its life in Leominster, Massachusetts in 1929, and then it moved here in 1951. So this is like a retired train car that's been affixed to, mid 20th century brick structural component in the back. And so 1951, it lands here on Washington Street, and in 1966, it's the start of the Barrett family's ownership of the diner, and I'm not sure who owns it today, whether that Barrett family continues. No?
No. Actually, so
Okay, so
this is very exciting. We did this on the James Walk in May, and it was quite impactful. This actually closes at 2 o'clock, but it looks like my friend Jose is still doing some work, and he's opened it up. So, Jose, you want to stand up here for a sec? No.
in a word, no.
Okay, well, let me actually say that Jose is the one that actually does the cooking here, and it's pretty amazing. I do hope you go up on the stairs and walk by to see, because you can't all get inside. But this is an original diner, and when you look at it, you'll understand what I'm saying. Many of us, myself included, have lived in the city for many, many years and probably never been in here. And shame on us, because it is a wonderful little place. It's got a great variety of food. Prices are very reasonable, and it really harks back to another age.
I'm so glad to be here and talk a little bit about Buddy's Diner and my experience here. Second day, I arrived in the United States 4 years ago, July 7th, 2018. It was a Sunday, and I came with my daughter. She was 12 at that time, and then she said, "Mom, I'm hungry." So, I didn't know anything in Somerville. I didn't know about Buddy's Diner. Didn't know about that it was a great community. And okay, let's walk and find something to eat. But it was 5 in the afternoon, and then we found something like Target, maybe grab some snacks there. Okay, so I walk here, and I saw Buddy's Diner, and I was like, and I stopped, and my daughter looked at me and said, "Mom, what's going on?" I said, "I don't know. Stop. I need to take a picture of that." I mean, that it's something. It's like, I don't know what it is. I didn't know it was a diner. I didn't know what it was, and I started taking pictures, and I saw a sign. The sign was saying "Help Wanted." And then, but we were supposed to fly to California next morning on a Monday, because that time I was supposed to volunteer there in an eco farm. Anyways, but I had everything planned to go to California. But then I saw the sign, and I said, "Oh, let me take a picture." And my daughter said, "Mom, are you planning to stay here?" We are flying to California tomorrow, right? I said, yes. But I don't know why I felt that connection with the diner, because I think, in my opinion, that's Somerville, that's the community, that's history, and it's something happened that time. And then next morning, a long story short, I could not fly to California, something happened there. And then I start like, what I'm gonna do now, because my job is there in California, San Luis Obispo. Now I need to stay in Somerville. So I'm gonna call Buddy's Diner, and I'm gonna go there. And then I came here, walk here 7 in the morning, Maria. She's Nicole Byros, she's the owner now. She bought the diner from John and Sue 16 years ago. And she's running the diner. Her mom was here, and I told her, I need a job. She said, you start tomorrow. And yeah. So, and this weekend, actually, I've been working for 4 years without a break. And this weekend is my first weekend off. And I'm here.
And you're back.
I was at Flood Festival yesterday, and we saw each other. We have met here before doing other situations, and the wall too.
And you put out the flyers in order to show what you're doing. Do you have the flyers?
Yes, I can give you later with the food. Yes. So thank you so much. We are making a movie about the diner. I met my husband here too, Ricardo Pineda, at Buddy's Diner. We got married 2 weeks ago. Yeah, that's another story. So this is a magical place, and I strongly recommend you guys, if you have never been here before, come here. Jose, he's the best chef. I mean, in Somerville, and I mean, it's awesome. Everything here is perfect, and we have a story now to tell through this film. And Dave Goss is one of the directors of the film too. He's helping a lot of everything. It's made inside the diner with customers, you know, and collaborating, and community Sky TV. And you guys, thank you so much.
If you came on the Jane's Walk, we did a whole elaborate thing here as well with David Goss, a professor at Tufts, who can tell you all about all the wonderful conversations and meetings and get-togethers that happen right here. So if you haven't been here, I highly encourage you to stop by sometime. 5 a.m. I think it's 5 a.m. Is that right?
5:30.
5:30. Oh, 5:30 a.m. for those early birds, up until just 2 o'clock, 7 days a week. So great.
Right.
Thanks, Brendan.
Thank you.
I want to talk about some lost Somerville now. Over across the street in the wooded area, there's an office park, and that used to be a part of Somerville called Cobble Hill. And on the top of Cobble Hill was a federal period mansion that was designed by the architect Charles Bulfinch, who designed the Massachusetts State House and was eventually, beginning in 1817, an architect on the United States Capitol building in Washington. So he was a big name architect at the very beginning of his career in the early 1790s, designing a house for a man that he'd actually worked in, Joseph Barrel's counting house for a time as a clerk before he went full on into being an architect. And so he's building this mansion that in 1816-17 becomes the McLeans lunatic asylum. And there's an interesting book about this, excellent book by Alex Beam, who is a columnist, I think mostly retired now, for the Boston Globe. The book is called Gracefully Insane. And I, really recommend this book. And so McLeans held forth on the former Barrel estate from 1817 until 1896, at which time it moved out to the Belmont-Waltham line. I think it's mostly in Waltham now, the McLeans. And there is a surviving piece of that house that you can see in the Somerville Museum, the grand double staircase that was in the stair hall that used to be in the the Barrel Mansion reception hall. So a little bit of it lives on, but that, and so over time, the McLeans, the estate is being hemmed in by, 3-deckers and tenements, and there's quite an immigrant community, and within the estate, the asylum walls, are the family members of Boston Brahmins, very wealthy families who, had a place for their mentally challenged family members. So, that is no longer, but it's very interesting to see the photos of what the Barrel Mansion looked like. So, all right, let's continue. This is going to be an entrance to the new Washington Street Green Line extension station. Okay, the other side, I beg your pardon.
Yeah.
So, and this line will go all the way up to the Tufts University campus. And, you know, there'll be stops in Gilman Square and Lowell Street and Ball Square. You can go to Ball Square for Sunday brunch in a very fast and efficient way now. And then it'll end at the Tufts campus. We've just been walking down Joy Street. Joy Street was named for Joseph Barrell, the of Bullfinch Design Mansion fame. Joseph Barrell's son-in-law was Benjamin Joy, who during the 1790s was President Washington's ambassador to Asia. All Asia. That was his.
Is that the same as Joy Street and Beacon Hill?
Well, see, now this is the thing. You wonder, there's a Chestnut Street down here. Benjamin Joy lived in a townhouse on Chestnut Street on Beacon Hill in one of the first brick mansions over there. Okay. So there were some streets in place before 1850, like Joy Street, like Linwood Street over there. And then in 1857, further down, there's a plan that shows later streets like Fitchburg, where Brick Bottom is located, and Poplar, and a couple of the other streets. But, Brick Bottom initially was associated with a vibrant melting pot of working families who lived along these streets. And in the manager's office in Brick Bottom, there's a map. It's kind of like a folk art map. It's a wonderful map where somebody has drawn the blocks and they've drawn the names of the families that lived in the different sections of the blocks. And you can see what a mixed bag of nationalities it was. And by all accounts, people got along very well to get together. And all of this began, the immigrant living situation began to be swept away in the 19-teens and 20s when you had industry coming in here, like 86 Joy Street, which was originally, it was built in 1919 by architects from New York City and Springfield, Mass. I'm blanking on their names, but I remembered where they were from. And it was built in 1919 as the New England Bakery Company. And come to find out that by 1920, the directories show that Somerville had 41 bakeries for some reason. That there were, and then in the mid-20s, the A&P complex that we're about to see made its baked goods that were then distributed to the early, I hesitate to call them big box stores, but the early supermarket stores. So bakeries were a thing, just as automotive sales paraphernalia was a thing in Somerville. And today, this is really a highlight of the open studios. Really, really talented artists in this particular complex. And I believe it's been sold recently. Does anyone know about this?
So I'm a tenant here,
Good.
and I've been here over 8 years. The previous owners were offspring of the original owner. They were very nice to us. But the new owners who own this patch, this stretch before the building that's going up, and they own the new building that's going up. They want to develop this whole strip. They've owned it for about 2 years now, and while they're very nice to us and they're doing internal sort of cleanups and stuff, the long-term story is not good for us. They possibly will accommodate some artists in the existing structures they're doing now, but you can imagine the rent will be sky high. So it's a disturbing
landlords from
situation.
Cambridge.
Dan, you want to say something?
Yeah, just kind of piggybacking off of what Paula said. I've been here for about a year, and we just think that having walks like this is really important. It shows that artist communities, artist buildings like this are the anchor of communities in a way that other industrial, residential, commercial spaces just really aren't. So we would hope that everybody here would support us in trying to get as many of these spaces saved as possible. They're getting harder and harder to find, more and more expensive for artists. So yeah, that's all I have to say.
One of the reasons I wanted us to come down here and see it as part of Union Square is this, for many people, is considered an offshoot of Union Square in many ways, and now with the transit stop and such, a lot of people will be coming here as well. And we're actually, the city, through the Planning, Preservation, and Zoning Department, is working on a neighborhood plan for here. It's very much in the working stage. There's been a couple of meetings over the last, I think, 2 years, Paula, is that right? Maybe a year and a half? Sure. COVID, of course, intervened in between. But for those of you who don't know anything about it, it's basically a transitional area by zoning, which means that the city is looking at all kinds of different possibilities here. Now that we have 2 subway stops very close by, obviously its proximity to Boston and Cambridge, where there is a shortage of biotech type of laboratories and such, it's become a very interesting site to a lot of developers. So, but we are looking for input from people that live in this area as well as throughout the city. So I wanted to make sure that people were aware that there was something happening here, and that there is a core group, a very cohesive an active group of residents and workers here, both at Joy Street Studios, which is not live workspace, it's just workspace, but then we're going down to next, which is Brick Bottom. Brick Bottom, we'll talk about that when we get there, but this is a community at this point. It didn't used to be, it was all industrial land before, and it's been going through lots of evolutions, and this is where it is today. So I thought it was important that we come down here as well to see this part of extended Union Square.
Okay, so we're stopping here very briefly to point out the James A. Kiley Company, which started its life on this site in 1890, and it was making carts, as in horse-drawn carts and wagon wheels. And 4 or 5 generations later, the family is making high-tech utility equipment. So if you look at Carol Zelli's Beyond the Neck book that was published in 1982, you will see a photo, you will see what the original wooden buildings of Kiley look like. Okay, so this is a really good view of the main A&P, Atlantic and Pacific Company, food distribution complex. This was where the goods that were going out to the A&P supermarkets in the Boston area were stored, awaiting to be put onto put onto trucks. And as it turned out, Fitchburg Street was really set out this wide, and that was very visionary, because when you look at the old photographs of the A&P days, and you see all the trucks lined up in front of the building waiting to be loaded up, you think, oh wow, lucky them. I mean, they had all this space to turn around in, and you can see the so-called Belgian bricks, or whatever you want to call them, the granite bricks in the street, and left over from the teens and 20s. And so A&P comes in here. First of all, A&P is founded in 1859, and it is really one of the first, if not the first, chain grocery stores in America. And by the mid-1920s. They're coming in here to Brick Bottom, and they love the idea that the McGrath and OBrien is right next door, and that the railroad is, behind the building, and that it's just an ideal place to send goods on their way to wherever they're going. So the building consists of this main storage facility. Then you've got in the back the bakery. You've got the repair garage building, and you've got a couple of other buildings whose original function I'm blanking on at the moment. But it was a complex of 5 buildings, and one of its claims to fame is that it was a relatively early use of ferroconcrete on a large scale. In other words, a very early example of ferro. When I say ferro, I mean it's like reinforced with iron rods inside the concrete. And an early example of such construction is the football stadium at Harvard University that looks like the Coliseum. That's 1903. Okay, and so, the Romans invented concrete, then it was kind of forgotten about during the Dark Ages, then it came to the fore again in Britain during their Industrial Revolution in the mid to late 18th century, and then it turns up in America during the second half of the 19th century. So let's talk about now. So since the late 1980s, this has been housing for artists, and complete with galleries for artwork. And is someone from Brick Bottom here who could you speak to more about?
Yes, Cindy's going to go do inside.
Oh, she's going inside.
Okay.
Yeah, in 1986 we moved in, and it was
This is a
former.
name?
My name is Ellen. Yeah, and it was a cold storage warehouse at the time. We bought it for $5 million.
Right. A&P got rid of it in the 1970s.
And so we've been here since 1986. However long that is, I've lost count. About 150 units. You don't have to be an artist to live here. It's a condo, pure condos, but there's still a lot of the original
You want to
artists.
talk about how when you first came here, it was an artist cooperative?
It was a co-op, but we weren't able to get favorable financing as a cooperative, so we switched and sold market rate condos on the top floors to subsidize, so that we had lower. I bought mine for $67,000, 1,000 square feet, to subsidize our artist spaces at the bottom.
Advertise open studios while you're standing there?
It's in the
we're having
flyer.
an open studios. Do come. It's
the best.
one of the longest.
Yeah.
Rented.
So this is a very important building in the city's history for a bunch of different reasons.
Just closer to your mouth.
Closer?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is an important building in the city's history for a number of different reasons. One of which is that I think of it as one of the first and most significant adaptive reuse buildings out there. When I first came to work for the city in the early 1980s, adaptive reuse of older buildings was just unheard of. The one thing that we did do is at Assembly Square, where we had the marketplace, or the mall as we used to call the Assembly Square Mall, people complained because they hadn't finished the ceilings yet. So that's just to give you an indication of what people were thinking in those times. So we've come a long way, thankfully, to my mind, and we're encouraging more and more owners of buildings or new buyers of buildings to reuse the existing buildings for reasons that I probably don't need to explain to all of you if you have any environmental sensibilities. Plus, culturally and sociologically, I would argue that keeping the older buildings and adaptively reusing them to new uses gives a whole lot of roots, and keeps the roots that people have in the city, the traditions, the memories, as well as all the materials intact. So this was a building that was a bull to actually convert. There was a gentleman that worked on this building with us from the state as a consultant with the artists. And that's wonderful that you've been here this long to know. It was a struggle because the zoning down here was all industrial. So there was no living space allowed in an industrial area for obvious reasons. we changed that in order to allow for this building, so because it was going to be live workspace, and the emphasis was on workspace, but you as an artist didn't have to have another apartment. You could live here as well in these very spacious, high windows, high ceilings type of units. And it is now, I don't want to say unnecessarily a model, but it's a template for these kinds of loft buildings all across, the country. So that part has really worked out well. What didn't work out so well was the financing. As she indicated, Ellen, they were not able to get financing as cooperatives, which is how it was set up. So they ended up going to condominiums, and they also were not able to keep it a completely artist building, live workspace. And so the upper floors, as she said, were actually sold as condominiums to people that were not artists, and then that caused a little bit of stress and tension between the occupants in the building. But over time, I think what's happened is a number of people here are not artists any longer professionally. They consider themselves artists in terms of hobbies and such, but they don't meet the technical definition that many artists would claim is necessary. So it's for the people that are the artists still here, it's a wonderful opportunity that it's lasted this long, and it saves it. And the good news, nobody's going to be able to knock this down and take it away. Unlike Joy Street Studios, where we just were, which is all rental, and only studios. There's no live space there as well. So it's a very significant building. They've done a really nice job at maintaining it over time. We're going to have this reception in what's called the courtyard, which is a lovely outdoor space, and that they can all enjoy. It's internal to the building, and so most people don't even know it exists. And all of the units are unique inside, and because of the space, the configuration, but also because the people that live there, very creative. So if you have an opportunity to go to their open studios, which is, what's the date again?
I'm so sorry.
Oh, there it is.
It's November 19th and 20th. I'm not sure what this other date is. It's just a 2-day event, November 19th and 20th.
It might be when the gallery show opens. I don't know.
There might be some further event.
Yeah. Well, this, as I mentioned, this brochure is a working draft because some changes need to be made. That was actually went right to the website, but that wasn't appropriate for the brochure. So
and Joy Street is also part of that event.
And exactly.
Yeah.
So the date for that is
November 19th.
November 19th, November 20th,
Always
which is
the weekend
Saturday,
before
Sunday.
Thanksgiving.
It's a weekend, and it's well worth it. It's open to everybody. It's free, and I mean, you can spend the entire Saturday and Sunday in both of those buildings and still not see everything. So,
Okay.
so
We're very proud of our cobblestone.
Yes.
that was my last thing.
Yeah,
Thank
good.
you. I was just going to say, I wanted to point out, because this is something that's very significant, and I think working with some of the people here a couple years ago, I think might be the last vestiges of
Extensive
cobblestones in the
cobbles.
city that are exposed. I mean, they're all there underneath the concrete or the asphalt and being exposed, but not for the right reasons. But these are intact, and so there is a thought that we should try and figure out a way to maintain them, just so that people can know what Cobblestone Street really refers to. So,
Much fun to bike on.
Ed, do you have some other things you want to say before we wrap up?
No, I just want to thank everyone for coming out this afternoon. It's great to see you all, and now we'll enjoy Brick Bottom. Thank you all.
While we're walking up, I want to point out the black fences